ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of the Movie Commentary Podcast. It's the podcast in which we watch movies and we talk about movies. And today, I'm pretty sure you noticed that I'm actually releasing two episodes pretty close together. I'm trying to get back on track. Kind of get back my schedule back on track to releasing an episode every single week. And since I didn't release an episode last weekend, I'm going to try and release two this weekend. So, kid you not, I literally just, I said, by just, I mean like 20 minutes ago, just finished the Jaws podcast, and currently finished editing that. It's currently processing right now, but in the meantime, let's dive into our next movie. So, to follow the spirit along with October and it being Halloween month and, doing all kinds of scary movies, I'm going to do a commentary on what I would say is probably my favorite scary film of all time. I am referring to the 1980 horror film The Shining, directed by the maestro of filming, I might add, Stanley Kubrick, and starring Jack Nicholson, Shelly Duvall, Scatman Crothers, Danny Lloyd at a very young age. You also got Barry Nelson, who I got a nice little factoid. I got an interesting factoid about him later, and then Joe Turkel, along with a couple other not neat little tidbits. A couple actors in this movie. That is essentially all I have in terms of an introduction. Okay, now a little bit of a side note. I am going to mostly try and talk about kind of the history of the story of The Shining and a little bit of the behind the scenes of The Shining per se. I'm going to touch very briefly on a couple of some of the conspiracy theories and like some of the theories behind like the meaning of the movie, because for those of you that don't know, that The Shining is a movie with a very rich it's got a lot. It's a movie where we have a lot of there's a lot of interpretations, and not so much so where there's actually a documentary that has been made called Room 237 that's essentially about it's like 9 different theories. So I definitely say check that out. And obviously for anybody that has not seen The Shining, I definitely recommend y'all checking that out. So let us go ahead and start The Shining. And it is a Warner Brothers picture, so we're starting The Shining out here. And we're starting out, and it starts off really ominously. We're starting off with a helicopter shot going over what I do believe is Standing Bear Lake. Let me see here. I have should be over St. Mary Lake. My bad, St. Mary Lake in Montana. And we are looking at these big, wide helicopter shots of a yellow Volkswagen Beetle just kind of going on these windy mountain roads. And that is obviously Jack Torrance, our main character, played by Jack Nicholson, going to his interview to the Overlook Hotel, which, as we are establishing, is in a very remote part of, technically in Colorado. However, the hotel in which it is modeled after is actually, which I'll hit on here. It's modeled after the exterior of the Overlook is modeled after the Timberline Lodge in Mount Hood, Oregon. And a lot of these establishing panoramic shots here were filmed on the Going to the Sun Highway in Montana. I feel like a lot of these were filmed going in Montana. Because a lot of like mountainous scenery and all that kind of stuff. And I will admit the music that is playing kind of in the background, it's kind of it's given definitely not a good vibe for the film. I mean, also these it also has these very kind of just eerie looking like scrolling blue text, which I never really understood Kubrick for why he did that. So I'll try and hit on the different, like kind of like the history of like the Shine. Obviously, like not only that, because that The Shining is also not only a great movie, great history, a great horror movie, but it's also an adaptation of a Stephen King book, a very one of Stephen King's favorite, most probably, I'd say his favorite book, my favorite book of his, the Stephen King book. Even though I will admit it's probably, I think, the only Stephen King book that I've actually read all the way through. And obviously directed by Stanley Kubrick. So you basically have like two titans of their respective mediums. You have Stanley Kubrick, who, in my humble opinion, is, I would say, the greatest film director of all time. And then Stephen King, who I think is probably the best horror fiction writer of all time. So, also another thing that's really eerie about The Shining, you have these really like eerie like title cards that kind of are interplaced here. So here we're introduced to Jack Nicholson walking into the Overlook Hotel. Jack Nicholson was Stanley Kubrick's kind of first he was basically the first choice to play Jack Torrance in the movie here. Apparently a lot of other actors were considered by Stanley Kubrick, including, and some famous ones too. I mean, Robert De Niro, Robin Williams, Harrison Ford. Apparently Stephen King wanted them to cast someone like Jon Voight. So it's very much some higher names were interested in this role. So it was again, no, Stanley Kubrick wanted Jack Nicholson, and that's ultimately who he got there. So it was actually really interesting because Stanley Kubrick and the other writer of the film, Stanley Kubrick wrote the film, but also the other writer, Diane Johnson, they actually would watch different Jack Nicholson films about, and they would try to determine, do we want him as like a more of a depressive, or do we want him more as like a maniac, and it's a little bit of both in the film here, so it's kind of nice. So now we're being introduced to Shelly Duvall, playing Wendy Torrance, and then young Danny Lloyd playing Danny Torrance. It's actually kind of interesting. Shelly Duvall is the only one that her name doesn't match her character's name, because Jack Nicholson, Jack Torrance, Danny Lloyd, Danny Torrance, and I think that's a complete coincidence. Now Shelley Duvall, she actually kind of doesn't really fit the description of the woman of Wendy in the book. I believe that Wendy in the book is a bit more of a stronger kind of female character, and Wendy is kind of intentionally made in the movie as kind of a bit of a weaker, housewife that can kind of like get walked over, and that's actually intentional. Stanley Kubrick did that intentionally, because in Stanley's mind, he didn't really believe that a housewife, that a strong woman would like put up with like all the crap that Jack would do, and he thought that she would play better as like kind of a more mousy like character that would just get walked over, Jack. So I mean, that's kind of however you feel about that. So, so yeah, and so basically, we're basically just in the interview process here. Stuart Ullman, played by Barry Nelson, is interviewing Jack Torrance, for the winter caretaker job. Interesting note about Barry Nelson. That is a very little known tidbit. He is actually the first actor to ever have played James Bond on screen at all. He played James Bond, I do believe, in a TV adaptation of Casino Royale, which for a while was considered lost, and then I think a couple years ago they actually found that footage. So Barry Nelson here is obviously, and this is like, and I think this even predates Sean Connery's introduction to Dr. No, I think, by about 8 or so years. So, for any of you Bond fans out there, Barry Nelson is the first ever actor to play James Bond in a movie/television part. Now, it's actually really interesting because, and again, I have read the book The Shining, although it's been a few years, so some of the minor details of the book I kind of have forgotten. However, I kind of know the broad strokes, but I do know that Barry Nelson plays Stuart Ullman kind of a little bit more nicer than what Stuart was portrayed in the book. He was kind of portrayed in the book as quote unquote just kind of like a dick. Honestly, he wasn't really. He was not really. I mean, he was really skeptical of Jack because I mean, rightfully so. Looking at his track record, I mean, Jack Torrance. I mean, he's a recovering alcoholic. I mean, he's injured his child. I mean, which we'll get to later in the film. I mean, but who's and in the book, which they go over it more than they do in the movie here. We hardly even get we get a mention of it here and there and some tidbits of it here and there. But Jack was a former English teacher at an academy, Stovington Academy, and he apparently got into a rage with got into like I don't know if it's like a fist fight or apparently like a physically attacked one of his students, and that ultimately caused him to be fired from his job, and so he's kind of finding it hard to get a job now because he's basically physically assaulted a student, which as a future teacher, I mean that's one of the big no-nos I think of the whole thing. So Stuart Ullman's about to talk about the old caretaker that basically would go crazy and killed his family with an axe. Not a whole lot to talk about there. I mean, there's a lot to talk about there later in the film, but I want to take the time right now to actually talk about kind of the history of the story of The Shining. So, The Shining was a story written by Stephen King. It was one of his really earliest novels. I mean, I don't know which order, if it was like his second or his third novel. Again, I will admit I've not read a whole lot of Stephen King. I kid you not, The Shining is the only book of Stephen King that I've read all the way through. But the idea was kind of planted in his head when he and his wife were traveling through Colorado, and they were just so happened to stop at the world famous Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. And they apparently were staying there the last night that it was open, which is on October 30th. The actual date was October 30th, 1974. And he and his wife were the only, tenants that were there that night. There was nobody else that was in that hotel with them. And according to like the stories, he was served dinner in the dining hall, by themselves, and the music was like kind of echoing across the halls, and it kind of caused like this eerie facade, like this eerie scene like when they were eating dinner. So it was definitely interesting. And then he kind of described later his wife had kind of turned in early, and it was kind of so it was kind of interesting. And he basically said that he found himself wandering around the halls of the Stanley Hotel. It's actually interesting. I've been to the Stanley Hotel. I've got a trip to Estes Park about 9 or so years ago. I mean, it's a really nice hotel. Of course, that was way before I actually ever saw The Shining. So, but I could definitely imagine. It is not nearly as remote as the Overlook per se, but but I can definitely see it being, quite eerie, so I can see that. And also, apparently, Stanley Kubrick, Stephen King, he said that he was also kind of inspired by some of his own feelings of quote-unquote antagonism toward his own children, because he said that, he would occasionally have, thoughts or, ideations of, harming his own children because he would just get so upset with them. I'm gonna pause here on that story. I'm gonna just mention the scene here. This is the famous elevator gushing blood scene. Now, this scene, I'm gonna hit on it right now, just for the quick tidbit that this was shown in the trailer of The Shining, and what actually happened was back in the 1978-79 when they were showing the trailer for The Shining, there was actually a rule in the MPAA where they wouldn't allow blood to to be shown in trailers, because the thing is, like, you had to be able to show trailers to, like, people of all ages and that kind of thing. And I kid you not when I tell you this story, Stanley Kubrick was able to convince them that it wasn't blood, it was rusty water. And that is a true story. That is a true story of how that trailer got shown. So, and again, it's the gushing blood out of the elevator that we get introduced to. And we see that, I believe, we see that, I think, maybe once, twice more in the film, so. Okay, so sorry about this. A quick aside, I wanted to hit on that story. So, again, going back to Stephen King, again, he would have, like, these feelings of antagonism toward his children. Like, he actually would describe himself as horrified, because, like, he would, say, like, he would describe himself as being, I would think about, like, killing my own children from time to time. He's even said it on record. I mean, he would, there's a story in the Shining here about how Jack Torrance would, Danny kind of messed up, like, all of Jack's, like, writing notes and whatnot, and how he tried to pull Danny up, and he pulled him up with so much, anger and force that he basically broke Danny's arm. And again, it was something very similar to what happened to Stephen King. And also another added bonus with another, not bonus, but kind of another aspect of Stephen King's life that was that influenced kind of the character of Jack per se was Stephen King, at this time when he was writing the book, he was struggling with alcoholism, and he was, and that's kind of something that he added to Jack was, Jack was kind of a recovering alcoholic, and as we see in this film here, I mean, he's I don't know in the story of The Shining how long Jack had not had a drink, but you obviously tell, I mean, he's not coping with it very well, so. So, yeah, so that's basically the overall story of how Stephen King kind of wrote The Shining. So it's kind of a bit of autobiographical and, just his own experiences. He also is also kind of funny because he wanted to get he had it set in Colorado, obviously, and he wanted to bit of a change of pace because, Stephen King's originally from Maine, and he wanted to, try to move the story out of, Maine, change of pace. So, basically we saw the elevator gushing blood. That was like a vision that Danny had that his quote unquote imaginary friend Tony showed him, and now basically a doctor and Wendy Torrance are just talking about like his condition and whatnot, and they're also going to kind of hit on that story about how Jack kind of broke Danny's arm. So, talking about Danny Lloyd, the child actor that got cast to play Danny Torrance. There was a casting call that I think the 5,000 child actors I think participated in, and they ended up going with Danny Lloyd, and I think it was maybe not I don't know if it was like that he was that good, or there wasn't. The only rhyme or reason that I got that they actually picked Danny Lloyd was because they actually wanted somebody that would kind of offset the accents that both Jack Nicholson and Wendy and Shelly Duvall would bring to their roles. Shelly Duvall is from Texas, and I think Jack Nicholson is from like New York or New Jersey or something like that. So they would talk with like Jack would talk with a New Jerseyan accent, and Shelly Duvall would talk with a bit of a Texas accent. So I mean, you have these distinct accents, and Danny Lloyd's from Illinois, and basically that being in the Midwest, and as a guy that's from the Midwest, I mean, if we have an accent, I want to hear it, because I mean, I've never heard of any accent in the Midwest, and I've been I've been all over the place. So basically, kind of interesting on how Stanley Kubrick got to make The Shining, or kind of how he discovered The Shining. There's a story that it's an unfound story about how Stanley Kubrick kind of discovered The Shining, but basically how he got to this point. So Stanley Kubrick, a brief biography on him. Stanley Kubrick was born in New York. He originally started off as a photographer, and he originally for a magazine called Look magazine. and but he got interested in kind of getting into film, so he quit being a photographer. Started making films, and he would make a film from, and he made he would make films like classics such as Fear and Desire, not Fear and Desire, Paths of Glory, Doctor Strangelove, 2001: A Space Odyssey. He had made about 12 years earlier. Clockwork Orange, and the last film that he made before he made The Shining was a film called Barry Lyndon. And the reason that he kind of got into The Shining was he wanted something that could appeal to all audiences. And one of the things that he felt that Barry Lyndon didn't really do was really appeal to all the audiences. I mean, Barry Lyndon is a 3-hour long, slow-paced movie. It is a very long, very slow movie. It is good. It's a good movie, but it is very long, and it might cause you to take naps in between. It wasn't well acclaimed at the box office, and it wasn't really well acclaimed by critics at the time. Nowadays, it's considered a classic, one of its classics. But however, he kind of wanted to, do something with, I think he also wanted to do a bit of a foray into horror, because Stanley Kubrick's a bit of a genre jumper. I mean, he doesn't really stick to one genre. I mean, he's done anywhere from comedies to sci-fi movies to dystopian, sci-fi movies to historical pieces to war movies, and then this is just kind of his foray into horror. So kind of hit on Kubrick and some more stories about him later. I kind of want to get back. So getting back to the movie here, we got Jack and them driving up. They're driving up. This is the Going to the Sun Highway again in Montana, and they're driving up to the Overlook Hotel. And then this scene, I do believe this is an actual shot of the Mount Hood, Oregon, Timberline Lodge Resort. And I do believe that they shot a couple of scenes of the Mount Hood location, because the Overlook Hotel was the Overlook Hotel was, the exterior was modeled after the Timberline Lodge, which was in Mount Hood, Oregon. And and then these interiors here that they're actually showing us right now, these are actually modeled after the Ahwahnee Hotel, I believe, in somewhere in California. And one of the things I think that's really interesting about it is that it's a lot of Native American imagery. Of course, the Ahwahnee Hotel in California is actually a very Native American centered hotel and resort. And they had a lot of interior sets, they had the big the lounge set here that they're walking through, the Colorado Lounge, and then the main kind of checkout desk. I mean, those were kind of modeled after the real hotels, but these were actually all built on sound stages. These were built at Elstree Studios, which is where a lot of you get the Star Wars films were filmed there. You had Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was actually delayed because Stanley Kubrick took such a long time making this movie. They had to delay Raiders because they obviously it just took them a while to make this movie. You get a bit of a sense that there's a bit of foreboding in this scene here, that there's this kind of high-pitched, kind of humming noise. And Danny looks back and he sees these two twins. And we also learn later that these are in fact the Grady twins that were hacked to death by their father. Thing about this movie that's really unsettling. It's two things I find. It's the the long shots, not the shots that are wide, but the shots that are long, that take a long time, that are just, they last for a long time, and that's one of the things that I find in that scene right there. Just held on it just held on them, held on him, held on him. And it's almost like it's like a still photograph almost. But then also the one thing it's actually an art of filmmaking that's been kind of gone to the wayside, but. And that they don't use it a whole lot anymore, but Stanley Kubrick used it a lot when he was making it. It was the art of the zoom, of zooming the camera in and out. And you see a lot of zooms in this film. I mean, there was a zoom on Danny's face there. I mean, there's a lot of slow zooms, like zoom in and out, zoom in, zooms out. I mean, and it really makes the film a lot more eerie for me, at least. But and again, it just kind of goes back to Stanley Kubrick's use of just use of photography and use of cameras. I mean, because he was a very much a camera-holic per se. And I do believe a lot of these exterior scenes right here, these were all filmed on a big giant stage actually. And these exterior scenes I think were recreated using the Timberline Lodge. Interesting thing enough, in the movie here, there's actually the use of the hedge maze, and of course the hedge maze was actually a replacement of the topiary animals in the book. For those of you that have not read or have seen The Shining, which again I recommend both reading the book and watching the movie. Both are really good. But they use the hedge maze in the movie here to kind of simulate the topiary animals, which of course that's going to be way later on in the movie. But if you look closely at a lot of the establishing shots of the Overlook Hotel, like when you're looking at the Timberline Lodge, you kind of wonder where's the maze located? Where can you locate the maze at? And of course, a lot of people kind of point to that as you don't really see the maze in the wide shots, and you can only really see it when you're up close. I mean, a lot of people point to that as intentional by Stanley Kubrick, and it's just something kind of just adding to the ghostly effect of the movie and that kind of thing. So anyway, basically it's on the closing day, and Stuart Ullman and his assistant, I don't remember his assistant's name, are showing Jack and his family around the Overlook Hotel, and now we have been introduced to Scatman Crothers playing Dick Halloran, the Overlook Hotel's cook, and I will admit I love Scatman Crothers in this role. I mean, he's not in the movie for very long, but he does a great job. He's very warm, and I love that. He's got just a really bright smile about him, and he plays the role of a very of somebody that you could trust, and it's obviously going to come into play later when Danny calls for help. Now, interesting with Scatman Crothers, so he knew about the film and he wanted to play the part, and it actually, and I don't know. It actually was kind of it was. Now this is something I don't really understand about this. Now I'm getting to a little bit of a subject of race, and that might be a bit of a touchy subject for some people, but just kind of hear me out on this. I do believe in the book, Dick Halloran is portrayed as an African American man. However, and Scatman Crothers is an African American man. So, and again, I have not read the book in a long time. I mean, I could be wrong on that. I wouldn't remember. If anybody watches this would like to tell me that, shoot me a message on Instagram or something like that. But the original person that Stanley Kubrick wanted to play Dick Halloran was a man named Slim Pickens, and from the only role, and Slim Pickens is very famous for playing the role of Lieutenant Major Kong in Stanley Kubrick's previous film, one of his earlier films, Dr. Strangelove. And the thing with Slim Pickens is that he's a white male. I mean, he's very I think he's from California or from Texas or something, but he's got like a very like hickish accent on him, and he's very much like a cowboy kind of personality. But the thing I'm just kind of like wondering is like, did Stanley Kubrick know that Dick Halloran was, if he was an African American in the book, which I've forgotten if he was or if he wasn't. I mean, I haven't read the book in a while. I mean, I assume I think he was, but again, that's just me on that. But I wonder if Stanley Kubrick knew about that when he was trying to cast Slim Pickens, or maybe if he just didn't really even care. But ultimately, Slim Pickens decided not to do the film because he didn't really want to work with Stanley Kubrick again, which he considered him a little bit too much of a perfectionist, and obviously that's something that that's obviously something that'd be that would come into play when they made this film. So yeah, so that role went to Scatman Crothers, which I will admit I like the part. I like the again. He's one of my favorite characters in the film. Honestly, I mean, again, he's not in there for a very long, but I mean, I really like him. So. Now, so now we're about to transition to the scene in which Dick Halloran explains to Danny the power of the Shinings, or what he would call the Shining. It's I would say unofficially titled that because Dick Halloran came up with the name. However, it also is the title of the book and the movie, so I mean we could call it that. So yeah, and so this scene is very famous for having multiple takes. I don't think I have an exact number. However, I do believe that this scene in which they were talking about, when they were talking about The Shining, I do believe it took over 100 takes, which. Some of you, I think for those of you that may not be as familiar with the filmmaking industry or like the filmmaking process, a lot of times when you're making a film, you're going to take multiple takes, and you're gonna hey, I'll do this. Like you'll take maybe 5 or 6, or depending on the director. If you're really picky, you might make 10 or 20 takes of of a certain scene. In order to have the actors and actresses play it different ways and to see how much you like it. But Stanley Kubrick was very famous for taking lots and lots of takes, and this was a very famous scene in which he took a lot of takes. Again, there's not I think the exact number was over 140 or something like that. I think that may be a bit exaggerated, but this scene right here, I think it was still well over 100 takes. Actually, it actually was a lot, so much so that Scatman Crothers just started to, he was breaking down in tears to Stanley Kubrick. He was just, Stanley, what do you want? What do you want from me, kind of thing. And I don't think it was that Stanley Kubrick was dissatisfied. I think he just was, I think it was part of his psychology that he knew to get as many different performances or different variations of the performance out of the actors and actresses. They go through so many takes and so many different variations, and the actors are just going to start breaking down mentally. So yeah, technically he's breaking down his actors and actresses using various psychological aspects, but So, going back, so basically just kind of what's happening in this scene here is you basically have, it's also kind of setting up that Halloran thinks that, there's something, basically telling him that, like, there's something amiss about the Overlook Hotel. He's not exactly saying that it's bad. He's just saying that it's just kind of, it could look bad. One of the things I also like saying is that it's kind of like, like he said, it's like the pictures in a book. I mean, it's not really there, or something like that. I remember going back to the scene here. I mean, the scene where Scatman Crothers kind of just broke down crying to Stanley Kubrick. Apparently, when it happened, Danny Lloyd was also kind of fine with it. I mean, it's kind of funny that when I actually sometimes watch this movie with the commentary, on the Blu-ray, and I remember Garrett Brown, one of the directors of photography on there would essentially he would basically describe like Danny Lloyd as kind of being a bit of a trooper about it. So now, and Danny has asked about the famous room 237. Now, I'll try and hit on it maybe a little bit later in the book, or I think I'll try to when we actually get to room 237. But for those of you that have actually read the book, that's different. Room 237 is actually room 217 in the book. It was changed for reasons that we will get to later. I kind of want to stay in like the continuity of what I'm talking about in the film here. So now we have a title card that says a month later, and the Overlook Hotel looks very much abandoned, with one single yellow beetle. And then we have Shelly Duvall playing Wendy Torrance. Looks like she is carting up some breakfast for her husband. Such a nice wife. And obviously the hotel looks very obviously empty, because there's nobody there. So now we have these famous scenes of following Danny on his big wheel, his tricycle, and the sound design here is just completely incredible they kind of was unintentional actually, because the way that the microphone was picking up his big wheel, I mean, he's going over like these hardwood floors, and then he's going over carpet, and then he's going over hardwood floors and carpet, and I mean, you can really hear like the plastic wheels on like on the hardwood floor and like on the linoleum floor. But when you get to the carpet, it goes silent, and it's very much very eerie for a fact. I mean, because that's just kind of the way that it is. It just kind of like the sound design. It's just, to me, it just adds to a little bit of the eeriness of this film. Alright, so she's making him breakfast. Although, I'm not gonna lie, bacon and eggs sound really good right about now. Now, this is actually that little nod to the book, the Stovington Academy, because Jack's got a Stovington Academy book, shirt on. But again, we don't really get a whole lot of mention of it here. I mean, I would say, going back to the book, in the whole idea, kind of behind the book, and like maybe the transition from book to movie. So Stanley Kubrick wrote the screenplay of The Shining, so he was the main screenwriter, but he also had help from a woman named Diane Johnson, who was actually a horror novelist, like Stephen King himself. Stephen King himself actually wrote a couple screenplays for The Shining. However, he never, however, Stanley Kubrick never used him or never even thought about using him. Apparently, according to the story, Kubrick thought that King's writing was on the screenplay was quote unquote weak, and I'd say kind of similar to what I said in my previous podcast about doing Jaws. I think Stanley Kubrick he wanted to take kind of the main aspects of the novel and kind of go from there. And I don't want to say maybe make like a more streamlined plot because but he definitely wanted to take the main parts of the novel and didn't like do a straight adaptation. He wanted to kind of do his own spin with just kind of the broad strokes of the novel. And as we'll see, that actually kind of causes Stephen King to kind of disown this movie in a way. I'll probably talk about like the whole Stephen King, Stanley Kubrick feud probably way at the end. So that'll be coming way up later. So now they're going into the hedge maze with a lot of eerie talking and a lot of eerie music in the background. So this is really interesting because this hedge maze is actually it's a great demonstration of the use of the Steadicam in the movie The Shining. Now the Steadicam was in my opinion it was a revolutionary camera system designed by cameraman Garrett Brown, who actually would assist in the production of The Shining. He was actually he was a very involved principal photographer of The Shining, and but basically what the Steadicam is, it's a kind of a gimbal system that one could like kind of hook onto their body, so that they could actually like film, so that they could actually film like handheld style shots. But the way that the gimbal system, and there was like a weight at the bottom of the system, the way that the gimbal system was set up, that it actually was able to allow the camera to move freely of the movement of the human, or it kind of separated the camera from the human, because anytime that you're ever filming using like a handheld camera, you're going to be a little bit shaky, because we're walking around holding, humans are inherently shaky creatures. The Steadicam, deletes that. It literally is able to take the shake out of the humans, and it, allows the camera to kind of like stay relatively steady, without, jerking around or anything like that. So, and this was one of the early. The Shining wasn't the first film to use the Steadicam. I would say it was revolutionary because it used the Steadicam in ways that it never had been used before. The Steadicam, I'd say probably the most famous use of it before The Shining was when Garrett Brown used it to film the majority of Rocky, and that was actually kind of born out of the cheapness of the production. But he uses it here, in different ways. I mean, in fact, actually, one of the for those big wheel scenes that they were using, what they actually do is they constructed a wheelchair, and they were able to like hold the camera quite literally like right above the floor, in which they would wheel Garrett Brown kind of behind Danny Lloyd, and they would actually kind of basically just kind of go in circles basically around the whole bend there. So because this scene right here, like you basically got Danny on his big wheel, and he's just kind of going around in circles. Interesting note about this is about some of these windy turny scenes and on the big wheel is that a lot of people look at these scenes as kind of proof to that the Overlook Hotel tells overall layout doesn't really make sense. I mean, there's some, as people have kind of like looked at the film, they've kind of analyzed it, that they notice that these don't really make sense. I mean, and then right quick here, I'm going to pause on that. I'll revisit that topic a little bit later, But right now we're going to the scene in which Danny first encounters room 237. He is on his big wheel and he walks up to the room and he's obviously going to check it out and see what's going on with that. And going back to some of the reasons why it was changed. So again, going back, room 237 was room 217 in the novel. Because the reason that Stephen King wrote it that way is because when he went to the Stanley Hotel, Stephen King and his wife actually stayed in room 217. So so that's what he wrote in his book. But when they got to the movie, they changed it for a reason. Now, the official reason that a lot of shining historians will kind of point to is that the Timberline Lodge in Mount Hood, Oregon, had a room 237 and had a room 217. And one of the things and when they were making the film, and then the Mount Hood Lodge discovered that they were actually going to be making a film which basically uses their hotel as the exterior looks of the hotel. They asked the production crew to actually change the room number from 217 to another number, because they were afraid that people were gonna that people were not going to want to stay in that room 217, which I feel like would actually be the opposite effect. If you would have room 217, I think people would want to stay there even more. Like, you'd have like ghost hunters that want to stay in that room. However, though, there are conflicting reports on that story, because a lot of people will state that the Timberline Lodge doesn't have a room 217. That actually is gone over in the Stanley Kubrick in the documentary room 237. Not talking about the book itself. So, another reason why they changed it, I'll hit on it later. And this will be during the scene when Danny actually goes into room 237. I'm gonna get back to getting back to the current scene here. Basically, Wendy has walked into, I believe, what's called the Colorado Lounge, and she's basically trying to check on Jack, seeing how he's doing, and Jack basically just kind of berates her for interrupting him and distracting him while he's trying to do his writing and all that kind of stuff. And it's actually kind of funny because Jack Nicholson himself is a writer, and he's he said that this scene was actually kind of personally difficult to film, because he him and his girlfriend, I think at the time, had actually had arguments like this, and he was he found it kind of difficult to do something like this, because it's kind of hit kind of close to home for him. So and again, it also is kind of showing the ever growing divide of Jack and his family. And then he's going back to doing his writing. So also, another thing that I'll notice is that his typewriter actually changes colors, so that's really interesting. So now it's our first instance of snow at the Overlook Hotel. Now there's going to be a lot of snow basically for the rest of the movie here. But this is also the famous Jack Nicholson stare, in which quite literally it is I don't know how many second shot of Jack Nicholson literally just staring into the camera. And I kid you not, he is so still that it looks like a still photographer. It looks like a still photo. And it's a great I don't want to say face acting scene, because he didn't really do a whole lot of actual acting. It's just great in the face, which I will admit. I mean, Jack Nicholson is really famous. I think he's a great actor that does a great job of using the face, very well. So that's pretty awesome. But again, that's the very it's just kind of a very um the very famous stare. It's the where he basically has got his kind of head down and his eyes up, and a lot of people have actually kind of dubbed that the Kubrick stare because apparently he's got somebody that's like literally head down, eyes up, just staring in in almost every one of his films. So now going back to Wendy here, and she's walking around, and I think she's gonna go into the general manager, Stuart Ullman's office, and she's gonna get onto the radio and I think talk with the Rangers there. And one of the things going back to the how the layout of the Overlook Hotel doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. A lot of people actually point to the window in Ullman's office that it's like. They're like, yeah, well, I don't really think that window can actually physically be there because a lot of people, what they will look at is they're going to be like, well, if you look at behind, there's building behind that window, but like, how can that window be there if there's like, how can that window be outside if there's like a building behind it? And that's a lot of different scenes of The Shining in which the turns that Danny will take or the routes that they'll take during the hotel. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And a lot of people say that, they that's probably as a result of the ghostly powers of the hotel or the hotel being like a character unto itself, something like that. I mean, it's I think Stanley Kubrick, he probably had a method to this madness. To why he would, kind of do all this convoluted looking, sets and set designs. So, so yeah. So we're gonna transition into the very famous Grady twin scene, in which Danny is riding down the hallway, and then he comes up to the Grady twins, and I always found that the lead up to that to this reveal really eerie because it's just following behind Danny just almost step for step, and it just seems that something's following him, and it's just really it's really creepy, it's really unsettling. And then they say, "Come play with us, Danny," and then we get really quick cuts to their mutilated bodies. And then, Danny's obviously afraid. He comes back to that whole, there's pictures in a book, it's not real, and he's trying to, talk himself down and all that kind of stuff, so. And then it's also kind of like the hotel just kind of asserting it's kind of becoming more alive and it's ghostly powers and trying to. I think they're also and I never understood why the hotel wanted Danny, because the overall story, spoiler alert, of the hotel is of the story of The Shining is that basically the hotel wants Jack Nicholson to kill Danny, and I never understood why. But then I didn't read Stephen King's sequel Doctor Sleep, but I saw the adaptation, and apparently they wanted to eat his shining abilities or something like that. Or of course that was the Doctor Sleep. Of course, I mean Stanley Kubrick, never even made or heard of Doctor Sleep, so who knows. So this is a little interesting scene right here. They're Danny and Wendy are watching a movie on the television screen. It's a little small TV, which, incidentally enough, does not have any plugins. I don't know if that's a battery-powered TV or something like that, but apparently the movie that is being played is the Summer of 42, which could possibly be a reference to something. It also possibly could not be. It really depends on kind of how deep you're willing to get into conspiracy theories, and I'll get into it in again when we get to the scene that I want to get to, which I actually think is coming up pretty soon here. But yeah, so Danny and Wendy are watching the movie, and then Danny's going up to the room to get his fire truck, and he is going to find his father, Jack Nicholson, all kind of sitting by himself in their room, just kind of looking like in a daze, you know. The music in this scene is just really eerie because it's like a piano playing. It's like literally like you have a guy playing a piano, like literally one piano key, and like ding 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 ding. And then Danny comes in and he sees his father, and Jack's just like sitting there, and it just amazes me like how like slow he like it takes like for some of these scenes to um like actually kind of play out, you know, because like he like just reacts like so slow, and it just kind of seems like just like looking at a still photograph, which to me it's just really eerie to the whole thing there. Like it's like Jack Nicholson, like literally this shot right there, like he just didn't even move, like until Danny comes into the frame. So, um, going on about Jack Nicholson, you know, and again, it's no secret that Stephen King was not a big fan of this movie, and not a big fan of a lot of parts of this movie when it originally came out. Um, One of the things that he really criticized Jack Nicholson in that role about was that he felt like Jack Nicholson was, quote unquote, he was too crazy when they already get to the hotel. He was already insane before they even all the shit starts going down in the hotel. And you know that's one of the things about, you know, Jack Nicholson, that he was kind of yeah, that Stephen King was kind of like, apparently according to the book, like, you know, Stephen King wanted Jack to be a bit more of a sympathetic character, and you know, according to like, you know, what we get with Jack in this scene, it gets a little bit hard to, you know, be sympathetic with him when he already seems like, you know, distance from his family, and it already seems like that he doesn't really want to be around them, because you know we've already seen like, you know, instances in the movie in which you know, Wendy and Danny are doing, like, you know, they're having fun doing their own activities, and you know Jack's like doing his own kind of thing, basically because he just doesn't want to spend time with his family. So it also is like, it's also a bit of a creepy scene because Danny literally just saw the Grady twins, and then Jack is saying, I wish we could stay here forever and ever and ever. And it's like, ooh dear, this is not gonna end well for them. um oh, it's such a the scene just plays out so long, and it's just so like creepy, and the tension is just really killing you with this scene, honestly. And I love how like Danny asks like Jack, like, "Hey, are you would never hurt mommy or me, would you?" And he doesn't even say no, I wouldn't. He's basically just starting to accuse Wendy of saying it again. So it's just, you can obviously see kind of his mindset where he is, I think, kind of predisposed to violence, where he's not just gonna, you know, do it or whatever. So oh my gosh. And then I mean, and Jack is saying like, I would never do anything to hurt you, and like, obviously it's like, yeah, I don't really think so. All right, so here is a famous scene that some conspiracy theorists actually talk about. So this is the scene in which Danny, a tennis ball gets rolled up to him, and Danny looks up, and there is nobody around, which is obviously very eerie to look at. Although I don't know why he would be playing at that exact location in the hotel. Okay, so one of the reasons that conspiracy theorists look to this scene is that they think this scene kind of confirms the whole idea that Stanley Kubrick faked the moon landing. Now, a couple of reasons why they will say this is that they say that the floor pattern of the Overlook Hotel is that very famous like hexagonal floor pattern that that has like the orange and like the red like hexagons in it, and they say that that looks like the launch pads from Cape Canaveral in Florida. Another thing that also will add to that is that Danny is also wearing an Apollo 11 sweater. And Apollo 11 is they're the obviously the first ever mission to the moon, to go to the moon. And that's also another reason why people kind of point out why the room 217 was changed to 237 was because people say that the moon is 237,000 miles away from the Earth, which approximately, yes, I think that is true. And also going back to that Summer of 42 movie that I talked about, if you multiply 2, 3, and 7 together, you get the number 42. So, and that is about as far as I will go with conspiracy theorists. I mean, I think a lot of them that are associated with this movie, I'm not gonna lie, are kind of crap. There are some that I think make sense, like the Native American imagery, like a lot of it, a lot that was put into like a lot that was kind of put into the like the genocide of the Native Americans, and how like all the Native American imagery is kind of an indicator of that, or there's some that like kind of suggest like the Holocaust, and I could see that. I'm more inclined with the Native American one, and with the Native Americans, and there's some that are just completely not true. Like, I mean, there's one that's like there's like a minotaur, like it's like an allegory of the minotaur with and some of those I'm like, no, you guys are grasping at straws here. It's actually a really interesting look. The Room 237 documentary. It's actually a really interesting look at the powers of overanalyzing films, or the powers of finding meaning in film. So, yeah. Because again, you get a lot of people that are like that would get really into the film, and would get really into look at every single little detail that so yeah. So Danny is walking into the lounge after Wendy. So Wendy heard Jack kind of screaming, and he confessed that he was having a terrible dream of killing her and Danny, and then Danny comes out just all traumatized, and how he basically had like a looks like he's gotten kind of roughed up a little bit, and I don't and then apparently Wendy's gonna look at Jack and she's gonna be like, "You did this to him, didn't you?" And I love Jack Nicholson's like acting in this scene because he's looking. He's in such shock about all of it, and a lot of like the way that like a lot of his facial expressions, the way that like he plays it, like it looks like you're literally looking at a photograph of him. Like he barely moves, and I think it's something that's just really creepy to look at, to be quite honest with you. And now Jack is walking, I think, into the gold room. It's the big kind of like ballroom in which, they had a lot of like, parties and whatnot when, obviously when you had people there. So, and Jack is going to walk into the gold room, turn on the lights, and obviously, again, Jack is a recovering alcoholic. And then I also forgot to mention that there's no beer, no alcohol in the cupboards there. So there is no beer. So it's basically just kind of an empty room that they're in. So Jack is going to walk up to the bar, and he says something that's really interesting. I mean, I don't think people explore this line as much as they should, but he basically says, "Man, I wish I could just sell my soul for a glass of beer right now." And then he just sits at the bar and is just like, "Man, I just want some beer." And then immediately after this, a bartender shows up, the famous Lloyd the bartender, and he's going to be like, "Welcome, Mr. Torrance. It's good to see you." And Jack Nicholson's like just acting in the scene. His introduction to Lloyd is just so just spot on. "Hi, Lloyd. A little slow tonight, didn't it?" And then he just does this really creepy laugh. Now, Lloyd the bartender, I always do Lloyd the bartender full name, played by Joe Turkel. Joe Turkel is actually Turkel. He has been with Stanley Kubrick, worked with Stanley Kubrick before. He was actually, he had a role in Paths of Glory, in which he was actually one of the, of the French soldiers that actually, got executed, for cowardice. I mean, quick aside about Paths of Glory. I mean, it was basically basically like a botched raid by the French in World War One went awry, and basically the higher command basically had to make an example. So they basically picked like 3 just random French soldiers, and they basically tried them for cowardice, and they ultimately executed them. And Joe Turkel was one of those ones that he got he got executed, and then he also was in the movie The Killing, which I talked about with Sterling Hayden in the Jaws podcast just a bit ago. And I don't really know who exactly he plays in. He plays a guy that's named Tiny, but I don't really remember who that is. I haven't seen the movie. I haven't seen The Killing in a while, and I don't really even remember him from there. Joe Turkel. He's also really famous for playing Dr. Eldon Tyrell. It was actually one of his last film roles. He played Dr. Eldon Tyrell in Blade Runner 2 years later in the 1982 sci-fi movie, in which he also gets his eyes gouged out by Rutger Hauer. So this scene here, we're in the bar scene. You know, Jack's got his ghostly glass of Jack Daniels, and he's gonna down it completely. And well, not completely. It's a Jack Daniels on the rocks, but he's gonna kind of talk about all of his problems about, you know, Danny and you know, with his wife, and he's like, I love the little SOB. Which, if he's if he's an SOB, then what does that make you, sir? That's kind of funny. And, you know, he's kind of going on about how he loves Danny, but he's also going to start complaining, but about his wife, and, you know, how she's kind of like holding him back and all that kind of stuff. So apparently, when they shot this scene, it actually took an entire shooting day to shoot this one scene with Jack and Lloyd in the bar scene. And apparently the day was over 12 hours long. It lasted from 9 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. The lighting in the set was extremely hot, which actually happened with a lot of the sets in The Shining. And the thing is, like, you know, they're wearing a lot of heavy clothing. I mean, Jack's wearing I'm pretty sure a heavy flannel, you know, shirt with like a red overcoat, and, you know, Joe Turkel is wearing a you know, like a 3-piece, you know, suit. So it's and apparently according to Turkel, he when he at the end of that filming day, they apparently he was just drenched in sweat, and he it was one of those long days. He also said it's his favorite, you know, scene in the film, and I will say it's a very good scene. The scene also kind of adds to the whole idea that Jack really isn't seeing ghosts and that he actually is going insane, because one of the things that that's interesting about this is that Jack is quite literally staring at a mirror. So, and one of the theories about The Shining that a lot of people put forward is that there's not really ghosts, they're just quite literally looking in the mirror and kind of going crazy. And basically, like, in every single scene that there is a ghost, I mean, with the exception of, like, quite literally a couple, there's basically either a mirror or a very reflective surface. So you can kind of take that for what it is. One of the many interpretations of The Shining, and that there is no ghosts involved. So, all right, so we are now meeting up with Dick Halloran down in Miami. Meanwhile, they should have had like a meanwhile. We're going to check on Mr. Dick Halloran in Miami. Now he is within his very symmetrically placed either apartment or hotel room. I'm not exactly sure, you know, which are which. And I say highly symmetrical because, I mean, if you look at the way that the shot is blocked and the way that Stanley Kubrick kind of, it's basically like, you know, there's like 2 lamps on each side, and like the scene is like very symmetrical, and it's like, this looks very well planned out, and like there's like a scene with the TV, and like there's like 2 lamps on either side, a TV, and then a picture above it, and, you know, I mean, and that's one of the very famous lines about aspects about Stanley Kubrick, is that he's you know, very much a symmetrical director, and kind of like lines of focus per se about a lot of his movies. So now Danny is calling out to Dick Halloran and basically calling him for help. And I don't know, in this scene, this adds to kind of the eeriness of the scene, because we're going into room 237, and Danny is just, he's kind of like doing these like convulsions, like with this like all this like spit coming out of him. So we're looking around, and we're doing it. This is a first person shot. Another great example of the use of the Steadicam, actually, and and we're basically just kind of going around room 237, and obviously Jack is checking it out. Again, I would say this is probably I would say the most creepy like scene in this entire film, to be quite honest, for me, because it just is it plays out so slow, and it's just such a, for me, just a really just creepy scene, and the first person advantage point, and the smoothness of the steady cam. It's just, just gives me the creeps every single time. And then Jack obviously sees that there is somebody in the bathtub. And it is a naked woman, so, which is very odd. And also, the creepy thing about it is that Jack's face just goes completely to like worried to like just really like creepy like pedo face. Honestly, yeah, that face. Oh dear gosh, that's like that's the face of nightmares right there. Let me look this up. Who is this actress that plays this? I do believe this is a ghost. I do believe, because this woman is a ghost. But who's the actress that plays this woman? Her name is Leah Beldam. I don't exactly know. I haven't seen her in anything, so and so Jack is walking forward to the woman there. And again, another interesting tidbit here. He's doing this in a bathroom, and what do you have in bathrooms? He's literally staring right at a mirror. So is he staring at a ghost, or is he staring at an actual, at just like a reflection or something? So I would also say that this is kind of I would also say that this scene is kind of um, a bit of a play on how the hotel is kind of starting to like kind of take over, like seduce Jack per se, and they're trying to take him. They're kind of starting to take him over, and like he's gonna start trying to do like it's every whim, and it's kind of like the manifestation of the hotel. So, but now as Jack looks at the mirror, he notices that there is something very wrong, and that the woman is starting to basically mold, basically like looks like she's like molding in front of him. I don't know, the like decomposing or something like that. And that woman's like, smiling, like laughing, and Jack's like backing up, and it's a very creepy scene with the woman there. And there's also a woman like sitting up out of the bathtub. It's, again, very creepy scene. It's just, and again, it's not that it's like, I think it's also, this goes for like the entire movie of The Shining. I mean, it's not like scary in the sense of like, like scary movies nowadays when you have like a lot of jump scares, and it's um what I would consider, to be quite honest with you, like cheap scares. This movie actually like works to like make you scared, and it really like hits home at like some of the like psychological like fears that we have, and it makes you creeped out instead of scared. And to me, that's honestly that's like the more scarier part of it, the creeping out feeling instead of the actual scaring. So I'd say I think this is the last I think this is the last like normal interaction that Wendy and Jack are gonna have together. Even though like Jack has been showing like forms of an antagonism for quite a while, but um, this is the last like um, I think I would consider civil before Jack just starts like becoming mad and wanting to basically bash her brains in. Good old Jack Nicholson. My goodness. So not a whole lot to. This scene, Jack is back and he's basically talking with Wendy about he didn't see anything. He's obviously lying, but he's they're talking, and Wendy's going to put forth the idea that maybe they need to move Danny out of the hotel and um maybe take him to a doctor or something like that. And Jack obviously is not going to really like that idea, so. Yeah, you see Shelly Duvall kind of. This is the beginning of stressed out Shelly Duvall. It's a very famous and somewhat controversial side to the production of The Shining is that Shelley Duvall was very much. I don't want to. She was mistreated, I would say, but according to Kubrick, he had a method to his madness. He basically said that that he basically wouldn't be nice to her on set, and he would actively make her life kind of very hard and kind of be kind of antagonistic towards her, and not not really and basically just not really be um nice to her at all, and he would basically tell his entire crew to not basically not don't sympathize. There's actually a behind the scenes like kind of fly on the wall documentary that Stanley Kubrick's daughter made of The Shining called Making of The Shining, made by Vivian Kubrick, and she essentially has this little scene here in which Stanley Kubrick is like, don't sympathize with Shelley, it won't help her, and and he's basically telling the entire crew don't be nice to her because it's not going to help her performance. And the ethics of that, do I agree with it? Maybe not. Maybe not exactly, but I mean it's yeah, I mean it worked. I will say that. I mean, Shelley Duvall gives a great performance in this movie. I mean, she's really stressed out. I mean, you can tell that she's really in a lot of distress, and and again, that's just something where you can kind of argue about the ethics about that, and whether, I mean, how far directors should go in order to get like the performance out of their actors or actresses, but I'll kind of leave that up for debate for another time. So now Jack is basically, he's kind of wandering around. He basically Wendy essentially asked Jack to leave the hotel, and Jack was like, nope, you're basically, is like, Wendy, every time you have effed up my life so far, and I'm not going to let you do it this time. So, and he's basically thinking that Wendy messes his life up, and now Jack is coming out, and there's a whole bunch of balloons kind of strewn over the floor, and obviously it's kind of odd because, like, well, there shouldn't really be anybody else here, although we've also had a couple other ghosts. So I think it's also just kind of showcasing that the hotel is really starting to like hook its latches into Jack's brain and really kind of hook their really trying to get they're really starting to reel him in, and he's really starting to do the hotel's bidding now instead of doing his own free will per se. Meanwhile, Dick Halloran is trying to contact the Overlook Hotel, see if Danny's doing okay, because he had that shining message from Danny. He's trying to just make sure that he's all right. He's contacting the Rangers out there, and he's just making sure to try to contact the hotel, which we'll see here in actually just a few seconds. So Jack is walking back to the gold room, and then he is going to cross over, and I love the camera work of this scene. He's going to cross over into a room full of people. And you can obviously tell that Jack is going completely insane here, because it's been going from literally one ghost, two ghosts, to like almost over to like 500 ghosts. No, not 500 ghosts, maybe 200 ghosts in this scene here. And I do believe that they're playing a song called "Midnight in the Stars and You." I do believe, kind of like an old-fashioned type of song. So. I love how Jack just says, Lloyd asks, like, hey, what kind of, what kind of drink will you want? And then Jack says, like, hair of the dog that bit me. And I'm like, I actually have never heard of that saying before. So, something I might start using. So this is actually, this ballroom scene, while it's only really, you only see, like, you don't see a whole lot of the actors and actresses in the background, and it's kind of you don't really see, they don't, they're not talking back there. They're actually not really talking. It's actually when Stanley Kubrick was actually directing the scene here, he actually was using this big megaphone, this bullhorn, basically telling all the actors and all the extras, just mime out your lines, just kind of mime out what you're gonna do, and just pretend like you're talking and pretend like you're doing this, but don't actually do it. Yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's another one of those, like, Stanley Kubrick kind of does things just differently. It's just it's odd, but I mean, I feel like that's just kind of like Stanley Kubrick. So, and then Jack is gonna get a whole bunch of, what, I don't really know what those are called. Like, they're like these, like, there's like these, like, yellow looking drink thingies, not mimosas, but they're like, but because of course this is supposed to be an older like, time period. So now we're being introduced to so there's a butler here that basically ran into Jack with a whole bunch of drinks, and now they're going to go into the bathroom in order to clean Jack off. And we head into the bathroom here. Now, this is really interesting, because this is quite literally where Jack turns, I think, into the homicidal maniac that he actually is. Now, so we learn that this is his name, that the butler's name is Delbert Grady, who we know that there's a Mr. Grady. We got introduced to the story of Charles Grady in the beginning of the film, and that he was the guy, that the old caretaker, in which he was in which he was the one that basically murdered his family and and shot himself, that kind of thing. Delbert Grady here, of course. I mean, and of course, obviously, the question is his name is Delbert Grady. However, there's also a guy named Charles Grady. Are they the same characters? Are they different characters? I mean, why is he a butler? I mean, it just raises a lot of those questions, which I'm pretty sure a lot of you will have about that. Now going into just a little bit more of the movie trivia, the actor that plays Delbert Grady is Philip Stone, who is another actor that had worked with Stanley Kubrick before. He actually played Alex DeLarge's father in A Clockwork Orange, which I do believe Stanley Kubrick is. Looks like Stanley Kubrick likes working with certain types of actors and actresses, but I don't know. And yet again, another scene in which Jack is looking at a ghost and he's looking into a mirror. So, but so this scene here, you got Jack talking with Grady, and one of the interesting things that Grady's going to say to Jack is that he's like, I've always, is that, I've never been the caretaker, you're the caretaker, you've always been the caretaker. And then, Grady's going to say that I've always been here. And then it's kind of a callback to a line that Jack said earlier in the film, in which Jack is like, I feel like I've been here before. It's like I knew what was going around every corner. It's like a sort of deja vu. Which, will this mean anything? Will it not? Who knows? I mean, it's, again, we're getting posed a lot of questions that at this point we just don't really have the answers to. I also love the use of the bright red bathroom. Like, we're looking at a bathroom right now, and they're in a bathroom talking, and it is quite literally just bright red walls. This movie is well known for its use of the color red in lots and lots of scenes. Apparently, I think there was an urban myth that every single shot in the movie had some shade of red in it, to like kind of showcase like the color of blood and kind of get that into your mind or something like that. Do I think that's true? I mean, there's some scenes where I question, but although Jack's jacket that he's wearing here is a shade of red, so it's a bit of a perhaps so. And again, they're talking in the bathroom here. This scene kind of goes on for a little bit long, I will admit. Although he's basically saying that he's actually starting to introduce the idea that, your son is starting to, involve powers that are going to interfere, and, that's going to cause problems. And, he might need to be, as in Delbert Grady's words, corrected. However, that also... Basically, and then he also goes on to say that he had his daughters that would try to burn the hotel down, and that he had to quote unquote correct them and their mother. So you can obviously see where that's kind of leading to. So he's basically planning the idea of harming Danny and Wendy into their minds now. So and again, it's not exactly I don't think it's exactly it's basically the scene in which Jack turns into the where he basically turns evil. So I would say that. Which again, I mean, that's kind of it goes along with the idea of what Kubrick had in this movie. One of the things that Kubrick says when he made the movie was that he basically stated that there's an inherent evil in all of humanity, and that everybody is capable of tremendous evil. So that's just kind of that's kind of how he views Jack as there's there can be a good person that is just already absolutely evil, but then you also have Wendy, who's who actually can show maybe the goodness in humanity when she does everything in her power later in the film to save her son. So Wendy is now really stressed out about the situation that she's in. Stressing out. Then she's gonna start hearing Danny yell out "red rum" from his room. Um, and I kind of find it a bit ironic, at least in some of these in this scene right here, because she's actually talking about how she has like, we have the snowcat, we can escape from that. Well, we have the radio, we can escape using that, and we can use that to contact people. And she's stating all these things that Jack is eventually going to basically sabotage, so that they actually can't escape, or they can't call for help. And then Danny here is taken the form of Tony, his imaginary friend. I haven't hit on Tony very much in this movie, in the podcast so far. So, in the book, Tony is Danny's imaginary friend. It's somebody that talks to Danny. We later find out in the book that Danny is actually that Tony is basically Danny, just kind of later on in the film. And so, but yeah, it's basically just kind of I think it's actually just like an older version of Danny, just kind of like going back in time and kind of talking to him and helping him through like this really tough time. And it's actually well illustrated in the book, and not only that, it's also in the 1997 miniseries of The Shining, which I have not seen, and I probably will never see, because I don't think it will hold a candle to this film. So, but in this film, Tony is essentially basically he's an imaginary friend that and Danny kind of uses his finger to make it out like Tony is talking to him. And that's actually something that Danny Lloyd kind of came up with, I think, during his audition process. Like, he came up with it kind of on the spot, of just kind of talking to his finger and like, "Danny isn't here, Mrs. Torrance." And I will admit, I think it's a great little kind of tidbit to use. I think it definitely adds to the bit more of a I would say a more creepy factor to it. Of course, that's just me. So, so Jack now is going to the radio, and he's pulling out some of the central components, so that they essentially will not be able to talk on the not be able to use the radio. And Dick Halloran is getting the call that they have not answered the radio at all. I will admit, if the radio wouldn't be working, and if the radio wouldn't be working, if I were the ranger, I would honestly be making a wellness check on him. But of course, that's just honestly a bit of a nitpicking for the film. So, so yeah, now Dick Halloran's gonna realize that he's gonna get scared. Now he's gonna catch himself a flight back to Denver. So, which, going from Florida to Denver, I feel bad for that guy. So, and Continental Airline, this is a flight he's flying on. I don't even know if that's an actual airline or not. So now Dick he's just flying back to Colorado. Flying back to Colorado. Then he's going to show his plane. Basically, he's going to just show his airplane landing at, I believe that's Denver Airport. I'm not exactly sure. As you can see, it's very snowy, which I do admit, I think it's a stock footage of a plane landing on an airstrip. But I would imagine the planes landing on snow would be very very touch and go for my liking, to be quite honest with you. All right, so this is Tony Burton playing, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't really know the name of the character that he plays. Now, Tony Burton, for any of you, the only film that I know him from, or films that I know him from, he plays the trainer Duke Evans in the Rocky series. He's basically, for the first two Rocky movies, he plays Apollo Creed's trainer, and then he later becomes Rocky's trainer. So, yeah, for anybody who's a Rocky fan, Tony Burton here is actually in The Shining. So, but also, now this is an interesting behind the scenes story with Tony Burton was that Tony Burton. Now the thing is, like, this is literally the only scene that he was in. I mean, he wasn't in a whole lot of other scenes, so he wasn't needed much on set a whole lot. One of the things that he but one of the things that he did one day was that he actually, and Tony Burton was an avid chess player, and so was Stanley Kubrick. And one of the things that happened on one of the days is that Tony Burton actually literally brought himself like a portable chess set with him to the set to see if they can, see if he could play anybody, during the break or something like that. And Stanley saw that, and I kid you not, he shut down the entire day of production and played Tony Burton in chess that day. So, and the thing is that the movie was already, I don't want to say behind schedule, but the movie was already running very long, and I will admit, I don't think you'd have a whole lot of productions that would be happy with a director shutting down basically an entire day of production to, play chess the entire day. So now I just talked over it. Very interesting scene, very interesting shot that just happened. There was a, basically, Dick Halloran was in, looked like he was at, Denver. I think he was in he was in the airport that he had just landed in, and he rented a car and was driving up to, to the character played by Tony Burton to get the Snowcat, and he's going to take the Snowcat up to the Overlook Hotel, and one of the things that he passes when he's driving on the highway up to the place is that he is he passes an overturned semi that has apparently crushed a red Volkswagen Beetle. I will admit this is unconfirmed, and this is kind of just speculation, but a lot of people look at that as kind of, I would say honestly, kind of a middle finger to from Stanley Kubrick to Stephen King about, hey, this is my movie, and I'm taking basically your story and making my version of it. So it's, you can basically take everything that you liked from your movie, which I think is basically encompassed by the red Volkswagen, and I am going to basically crush it. So there you go. So now Wendy is going out to see if she can find Jack, and it does not appear that he is around, at least from what she is seeing. And again, these are some of the scenes that are just really just kind of, I think, really kind of get you frightened there. Interesting thing. So the lights coming in through through the windows there, those are all basically like these just big, giant, like, just lights that are just these big giant lights that are just shining in through the windows there. They're basically like these just giant, like, I don't want to say like LED lights, but they're just like these just giant torch lights shining in through there. And one thing that about Stanley Kubrick that he's very famous for, he's very particular, very meticulous about how he gets the lighting in each scene, and how each scene is set up lighting wise, and that lighting actually caused the sets to overheat, and eventually the sets had burned down actually. There's actually a famous scene with Stanley Kubrick kind of laughing at the sets that had been burned down. And it was kind of an interesting scene. So this is the famous all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy scene, in which Wendy comes up and sees that's literally all he's been typing is all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And as you can see, she gets really stressed out by seeing that, and then she goes to his stacks of work, and then it looks like it's all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, all work, no play makes Jack a dull boy, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Now this is, and these are all hand-typed, pages and pages of manuscript. And Stanley Kubrick, he had his secretary type out all of these pages, all of these so these are all hand typed pages of all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, and it's all hand typed by his secretary. I mean, and she typed out every single page of that. I mean, it's not like today where, and the thing is that's what makes it kind of authentic, because you can't really do all those you can't really copy not any of those pages, because they're all like different formats. There's all like different like spelling errors and like spacing errors. I mean, there's a lot different. There's a lot of variation in those pages there. So it's very. So it kind of adds to that authenticity that Stanley Kubrick was always looking for when looking at his films. So now we look at Jack. He's, looks very, demented, to be quite honest with you. Going back to the lighting of Stanley Kubrick and kind of his MO about that. According to this film, he apparently he would actually use the actors and actresses. Literally, he would use Jack Nicholson and Shelly Duvall as stand-ins for the lighting, which is actually very unique for a film production, because a lot of times when they're doing the lighting for a particular scene and they want to see how it would light up like different people and characters and whatnot, a lot of times you won't use your principal actors. You'll just use like a stand-in, to see how the lighting will affect, and how it will be in the movie and whatnot. And I think Stanley Kubrick, Jack Nicholson even says Stanley Kubrick was the only director that would actually use the actors and actresses when it came to staging the setting up the lighting of a scene and making sure that it was all done properly. Which, thinking about it, it makes sense, because light bounces off different people like in different ways. So you kind of need to really use that fine-tooth comb, to really make sure the light is right, especially a guy like Stanley Kubrick. And so this is the scene in which Jack and Wendy are talking, and Wendy is really upset. She's really like crying, and Jack is basically saying like Jack is just always advancing at her, just making it like all this kind of stuff. So, and this is another one of those scenes that it just took a lot of takes. It took them a long time to get this scene down. And again, Shelly Duvall is really she's just not having a good time on this film. She's been mistreated so harshly. She actually it actually got to the point where Shelly Duvall, like, she started literally getting physically sick, and her hair was falling out during this film. It was such a troubling production for her. It was just not good for her psyche at all. And even same with Jack Nicholson. It was it wasn't that he didn't have an easy ride either. He had long days. He'd shoot. His girlfriend at the time basically would describe him coming home and collapsing on the bed, after a day of shooting. And Jack Nicholson also, Jack Nicholson, being a method actor, really tried to get himself into the mindset. So one of the things that he would do, and it's kind of funny, when I read this trivia, apparently he ate nothing but cheese sandwiches for a while, which apparently Jack Nicholson hates cheese sandwiches, so he would get in that really agitated mood. Again, I think Jack Nicholson being a method actor, that really paid dividends in this film, because he really takes the cake, really takes the, no pun intended here, but really takes the cheese as, Jack Torrance, I think. So yeah, no, it's just a intense scene. I mean, they're, Wendy's swinging the bat at him now, and Jack he's finally starting to say, he's gonna basically hurt, Wendy. He's basically saying, I'm gonna bash your brains in. I'm gonna bash them right the F in. So yeah. One of the interesting things that one of the editors of the film talked about when they would go over the various amounts of takes that Stanley Kubrick would do in this film, was that they would actually see kind of like a progression of the actors, and they're kind of like their dip into like insanity. Like basically what he would say is like, well, okay, so the actors at first would they would do the first couple takes like kind of straight, to it, like kind of how they would normally do it. Then they would start kind of doing a little bit of then would start like reserving a little bit more, and then they would start trying different things, maybe starting to act like out of character and that kind of thing, and start doing some really weird stuff. And Stanley Kubrick, he kind of has that, he's got a knack of getting really unconventional takes out of his actors and actresses. I mean, he this is a man that's also very famous for, in the movie Dr. Strangelove, when George C. Scott was playing a General Buck Turgidson. George C. Scott he would film the George C. Scott's rehearsal takes, and he would use the rehearsal takes in the final film, even though he would say he wouldn't do that. And that actually kind of caused George C. Scott to, become kind of mad with him. So, I mean, it's again different movie, but again, it's just kind of, I feel like, Stanley Kubrick's, just way with, his people. And the thing is, like, Stanley Kubrick's not a really, warm guy. I mean, he's really kind of, he's a bit of a nihilist, actually, a bit of an absurdist and a nihilist. I mean, you're not going to have a good time with him. I mean, you're just going to, kind of make the film, honestly, not have a good time. Or in the case of Shelly Duvall, she's going to, have a horrible time. So, and now Wendy has now locked Jack into the pantry. And she also grabs the knife that she'll be fighting Jack with. Too bad they don't have any firearms. It would also make Jack's life a lot easier. And this camera angle that they show on Jack is, really interesting, because they actually showed like the behind the scenes of how they actually filmed this shot. They actually literally would, Jack Nicholson had to like position himself to where like the camera could literally lie underneath him and film himself, and it really showed like Stanley Kubrick using like a long lens in order to like show kind of like get the look that he wanted. God, poor Shelley Duvall. I feel so bad for her. She had such a terrible time on this film. I mean, I will say she gave such a great performance, but it's just, unfortunately, I mean, I personally maybe wouldn't agree with the ethics of it, but, of course, that's just me, so. No, really interesting. So Wendy says that she's gonna try and get that she's gonna try and get Danny down to the to Sidewinder and the Snowcat. Now, one thing that I've noticed that I noticed in the book that I noticed was a lot different than the movie was that in the book they actually leave the hotel quite a bit, at least before the snow comes in, and they they check and they and oh shoot, what was it? Like I mean, they make trips down to like the towns. Like I mean, Wendy even just said the town of Sidewinder, which is that the town that's the closest to the Overlook, and but in the movie they don't leave the hotel. I mean, it's basically like they're you know I want to say trapped there, but they never leave and. Um, it's just I think it just adds to the isolation to the characters because essentially once they get to the hotel, they're there together. They're not they're nobody else is there and they're all by themselves. So oh, and here's a scene. This is a really the scene just really gives me the creeps right here. This is Jack essentially sabotaged the Snowcat and Wendy's finding it out, and she's discovered that she's basically trapped up there. And I will admit the horror on her face is quite palpable, to be quite honest with you. I can just imagine it's just a lonely hotel up in the middle of the mountains, just not like just way the heck away from everybody. So Jack is now going to wake up. And apparently Delbert Grady, the butler, is going to be talking to him about, trying to get out. Now this is the one scene that people that are on the ghosts are actually ghosts and they're actually real. This is the one scene that they point to and is like, yeah, this is why, this movie has actual ghosts. It's because, so this is a scene where Jack is talking through the door and he's talking to Delbert Grady, and he is, and eventually Grady's gonna let him out of the pantry. But also one will also know that the door is it is bit shiny, so it's kind of like looking through a mirror, like what we were talking about. And however, I have never gotten I've never been able to explain how he gets locked out of it, because he literally they unlock the door and let him out. And well, is it? I mean, and I'm not trying to persuade anybody to say there are ghosts and there are not. I'm just kind of giving the interpretations that I've been hearing, and the ones that I find the most interesting, at least. Especially the ghosts in the mirror one, because that one really is to me, it just really, I think, says a lot about I think about maybe the human psyche, or I mean, it just says how easily humanity can go insane and that kind of thing. So one of the funny things, a funny story related to The Shining was actually a conversation that Stanley Kubrick had with Stephen King, and regarding ghosts, actually. And Stanley Kubrick, who basically he called Stephen King, is like, don't you think the book is rather optimistic? And then Stephen King is like, well, how do you think it's optimistic? And Stanley Kubrick was like, well, if there are ghosts, that means that one must believe in, that means that there must be an afterlife. So that means that there is life after death. So that is an optimistic approach to life per se. And I remember Stephen King replied to him. He's like, well, some people might consider the ghosts, some might say that the ghosts are trapped on Earth. And some might consider that, them being trapped on Earth is them, being in hell. And then, Stephen King, and then Stanley Kubrick, I think he took a long pause, and he's like, well, I don't believe in hell, so. and because, Stanley Kubrick wasn't really big into all the he said that he wasn't into any of Earth's monotheistic religions. But what he said was that he could, construct, a scientific, definition of God. I don't know what that means, and honestly, don't even ask. I mean, to me, it's just kind of one of those things that, Stanley Kubrick is just, Stanley Kubrick being Stanley Kubrick, so. So now Dick Hallorann is is in his snowcat, and he is going up the mountain to the Overlook Hotel in order to, help Danny and Wendy. I will admit, this is a great scene acted by Danny Lloyd. Now, this is the scene in which he takes the knife, and part of your thing is like, is he going to, stab his mom? But no, he just takes the knife, and I love how he just, I swear, they must have given him, a rubber knife in this. I don't think there was any way they could have possibly given him, a real sharp-bladed knife like that. But because I feel like that's just like child endangerment and something like that. But anyway, so he's basically just doing a red rum, and and it's it's like in a like a trance state. It's like it's Danny being Tony essentially. And the thing is that's really awesome about the scene here. It's one continuous take, and those are scenes are really hard to pull off. I think for any actors, but for a child actor especially. I think it's a great performance. There's some people that kind of say that Danny Lloyd's performance was maybe not the greatest, but I think it's a pretty solid performance. Honestly, I think he does a good job in the film. I think he's one of my favorite. He's one of my favorite. I would say it's Dick Hallorann and probably Danny and my favorite characters in the film. Now he's gonna write red rum on the door there, which he's been seeing in his various shining, visions, which spelled backwards is murder. But which is actually, it's kind of interesting because if you so it spells murder backwards, but if you but Stanley Kubrick, I don't think he knew that when he actually was making the film. I think he just kind of discovered it when he was making the film, and he kind of liked how it the literary kind of side of it. So. But now Jack is back, and he has an axe, and he is now chopping in the doors in order to get to Danny and Wendy. And now the final kind of chase battle, whatever portion of the movie you said is starting to commence. Bit of a change from the book to the movie. Jack Torrance in the book, his main weapon of choice is actually I think it's a croquet mallet. It's like that game where you have the balls on the grass, and you kind of hit them through those little arches and that kind of game. And then in this movie, Jack is using a fire axe. Now, the interesting thing about it is Jack Nicholson was actually a volunteer firefighter and fire marshal, and one of the things that when they were filming the scene, they were actually going to use they were actually going to use fake doors for him, but Jack Nicholson would break them down so easily that started using real doors, and I think they went through quite a few real doors when they were going through this scene here, because again, I mean, Jack Nicholson was just so great, and chopping those doors down because he was a firefighter essentially, so he could do that. So I don't know if the Little Pigs is an ad lib. I feel like it may have been. And I also love, like, it's actually kind of funny because in that documentary of the making of The Shining, you can actually kind of see Jack Nicholson getting ready for this. I mean, he's kind of like doing like this, psyching himself up, to chop the door down in the set there. So it's pretty, I think pretty cool. So he's chopping the door. The scene actually, like, it up chops all the way through. Now we're gonna get probably the most famous shot of the entire movie when Jack looks into the door and it says, "Here's Johnny," and that's obviously a play on the Johnny Carson show, and Stanley, and it was actually really interesting because that was an ad lib by Jack Nicholson, and because it was an ad, but one of the interesting things about it was that Stanley Kubrick lived in Europe. He was born and raised in New York City in the United States, but he was I think it was during the production of, I think 2001 it was, or during the production of one of his films, he kind of took up residence over in England, and then that's basically where he stayed for the rest of his life. He stayed, I think, over in England. I think he just may have gotten tired of America and that kind of thing, and he wasn't really. And Stanley Kubrick, didn't really like flying. In fact, it was kind of odd. He had a pilot's license, but he was afraid to fly. He had a fear of flying, but which makes sense. Yeah. So I mean, but because he didn't really know the Johnny Carson show. And because he didn't know about it, I mean, he almost didn't use that shot in the film because he didn't understand, why they would, have the scene like that. So, or like why it was like so like important or something like that. I don't know. All right. So Dick Halloran has now arrived at the Overlook Hotel, and is there to see if he can help Danny out. And I will admit, I mean, I feel bad for Dick because he's just. I mean, he's walking into just a trap. I will admit, though, like, I would not, that, I mean, the way that it happens, it's just so, like, kind of creepy because it's just, you walk into the hotel and you're just walking around, and there is nobody there. It's so silent and so creepy. Now, another difference from the book um, to the movie is that Dick Halloran Dick Halloran, I'm gonna give it away before the scene happens, but Dick Halloran actually survives the book and survives in the book. However, in this movie, quite literally in a few seconds here, he is going to get axed down by Jack. And, which is, again, kind of sad, because, I mean, he's such a great character, such a warm character, but it's just a bit of a sad scene. And when he comes up and he gets, just axed in the stomach there by Jack. And dude, I can imagine like people when they watch this movie, it's just the tension of when Jack is gonna, because Jack is gonna hop out and, I love how Stanley Kubrick, he just plays it. He does this, lets the scene play out for a long time, up until when you get right at the end here, is when Jack hops out and shoves an axe right through his chest. And again, that's probably, I would say, the closest thing to a jump scare in this movie, when Jack kind of hops out and axes Halloran in the chest. But yet it's I feel like that one, like, there's a great like setup and payoff to it, because I mean, he just absolutely it just builds, and then it just he comes out of nowhere and just axes him straight in the chest. And now Wendy is going through the hotel trying to find Danny. She's running around trying to find Danny. And there's a lot of different music, a lot of different noises happening right now. Don't exactly know what. That's really interesting, because she's gonna start like she's seeing all these like different like all these different ghosts in this hotel. And this is the one scene where I never understood this. Like, there's a man in a bear costume and then just another man, and obviously Shelly Duvall and Wendy looks just absolutely horrified. I never really understood the man in the bear costume and the other man. It looked like they were doing something maybe private, but again, I don't know. It's also just kind of like the whole idea that, the hotel is like, places that shine, that idea that Dick kind of said earlier in the movie, the hotel is like very much alive right now, and, all the ghosts are basically coming out to play, essentially. And so it's kind of funny like that. Now Jack is turning on the lights to the maze outside, and basically what's going to happen is Danny is going to lead Jack out into the maze. And then you have a Jack with his trademark limp there. He's limping along with the axe in his hand. And then Danny's going to lead him into the maze there. And it's actually funny, the maze set, well, no, the snow and all the stuff on the ground is actually all kinds of styrofoam and salt, essentially. I mean, that's essentially how they were able to get the effect of snow, was just the use of all the styrofoam and the salt and all that kind of stuff. However, when they were filming this, it got really, really hot, and they had to. And the thing is that they have to act like they're cold, and that's, I'm not gonna lie, that sounds like a really tough thing to do, when it's really stupidly hot outside. And I think also the salt would, eat away at, like, I think the soles of their shoes as well. So I think that also was another problem that would cause. And not only that, with it being a maze, they would get lost in there. I mean, because it's a maze, and they would a lot of times get lost in there, and they would not know how to find their way out. So it was pretty funny, at least for what I say. And so Wendy is going around, going around. And then she sees that, Dick has been murdered on the floor there. And this is probably the most terrifying. It's like just seeing kind of Shelly Duvall's just like just reactions to it. She's just absolutely terrified. Now there was a man that just like held up a glass and said, "Great party, isn't it?" And he had like a whole bunch of like blood coming through. A lot of people wanted to say that is the Charles Grady character that kind of shot his brains out, because I mean it looks like a guy that shot himself in the head. However, I mean, it's again up to interpretation, because again, it doesn't look. It's two different characters than the Philip Stone character, and then the Philip Stone Delbert Grady character. So I never got this scene. The whole bunch of skeletons just sitting in a room at the Overlook. I mean, maybe the ghosts, but again, I'm not really sure. So it's kind of fun. It's funny like that. And so now Danny is trying to cover up his tracks, essentially. He is basically walking backwards to kind of cover his tracks up, and then he's going to kind of hop across, hop into an extra section of the maze and try to cover his tracks up to kind of throw Jack off. And then now Wendy witnesses the elevator of blood coming down. Which this shot here, it's quite crooked actually compared to the other shots of the elevator, but still nonetheless terrifying. That shot of the elevator pouring blood out, probably one of the most famous, another iconic, shot of the shot from The Shining. Apparently that shot only took, I think, about 3 takes to do, but the catch was that it took them 9 days to set up each shot that they made, and obviously when you set up that shot, I mean you got to clean all the blood up and get it all dried out and all that kind of stuff. So that's a tough scene to shoot. I mean. And of course, I know with Stanley Kubrick being a noted perfectionist, I mean, it probably made it even tougher. So now Jack has kind of lost Danny's, trail in the maze, and so now Danny is going to use his footprints to lead himself out of the maze. Which I will admit, I mean, I mentioned something about a minotaur earlier in the film, and I do admit the idea that the I think it's like the story of like not Perseus, of the guy that had to fight the minotaur in the maze, and he had to like leave like a trail of breadcrumbs in order to like get himself out. That I can see how that kind of that how some could see that, at least in this part here, but yeah, and you can also see that Jack's starting to get really, really cold, and of course since it's like below freezing outside, at least where he's technically what we're supposed to believe. So and then Danny's going to come out of the maze, and then Danny is going to escape the maze, and Shelly Duvall's going to come up and help. Shelly Duvall's going to come up to hug him. So a bit of a happier ending, at least. At least they escape, without getting killed. I feel like because actually one of the earlier drafts in the film was actually the ending was that essentially all of the that all of the main characters, Jack, Wendy, Danny, they all die, and like they had like basically forest rangers come into the hotel and find like they're like I think it was like frozen bodies, and Dick Halloran looked like he basically blew his brains out essentially. So, but that was one of the earlier drafts. Another deleted scene. This is actually a deleted scene, a scene that was shot and was not included in the. It was included, I think, in the very initial release of the film, but it wasn't in the newer. But I think after test screenings, they actually took it out. It was a scene in the hospital that happens right after this scene, in which Wendy and Danny are visited by Ullman. And they're basically like kind of doing a little bit of debriefing, saying that they didn't find Jack's body and all that kind of stuff. And basically the as I stated earlier with that tennis ball, the thing that ended up happening with that tennis ball is Stuart Ullman tosses Danny a tennis ball, and I'm pretty sure it would have been the same tennis ball that Danny got rolled to him at The Shining. So I mean at the hotel. So I would have definitely liked to seen that deleted ending, that deleted scene kind of in between here and the ending, but I also can see why they got rid of it, because, I think the lack of closure kind of helps the film out, so. And then Jack has now been frozen to death with a killer glare on his face. So now the final shot here, this has been the debate of all film historians, all film buffs who have since seen this movie. We are doing a slow zoom shot into a picture at the center of the shot. And what's in this picture is going to showcase basically a giant party. Of course, this is, the days before social distancing, so, they were all in the party, not wearing masks. And you notice right at the center there, you see Jack. And you're wondering, how did Jack get into that picture? Or why is Jack in this picture? And then they say that, it was, the photo was dated July 4th, 1921. And again, I mean, the shot just adds so many questions about, Jack's, like, what happened with Jack. And, a lot of people will cut back to the whole, like, he was the caretaker. He was always the caretaker, vibe, conversation that he had with Grady. So, again, it's very interesting ending. I mean, it was... It's just so, it leaves you on so many questions, and it's such a oof. And it leaves you with chills too, because I mean, it's just the slow pan towards the picture is just such a oof. It leaves you with chills, honestly, towards the end. Like, after everything that happened, how could this movie possibly end? And it just slow turn, and then that picture in the middle there. So, what do I think happened with Jack at the end? I mean, some people say that he was a reincarnation of a ghost. Other people say that he was a other people say that he was that he was like absorbed into the hotel. What do I think? I honestly don't really even know. Honestly, I was I mean, I'm not gonna lie. That's one of the things of the film. I haven't made a whole lot of, like, conclusions on The Shining, or I haven't really looked into it. I kind of just like to enjoy it for for better or for worse, I kind of just like to enjoy it at face value, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I'm not really. I mean, especially looking into like how much people really dive into the film and how much like really look into it. I just am not that interested in doing that, and so yeah. So we're going through the credits here, and this is. So again, and so I know what I'll talk about. So the Stephen King Stanley Kubrick feud. Now, it is a well-known fact that Stephen King did not like this movie. He didn't like any of the casting. He didn't like Jack Nicholson playing Jack. He didn't like Shelley Duvall as Wendy. He didn't. He thought that the movie. He didn't like Jack's characterization. He wasn't at all. I mean, he thought that the movie. He said that the movie itself it was out to hurt people, and he didn't really like that per se. I mean, he wasn't. That's just not the type of book that he wanted. What do I think? I mean, and there are some other reasons too. Like I think that he also just didn't really like maybe the idea that he just the movie had gone so far away from the book. Hang on, maybe I'll look this up. I got the Wikipedia page of the book of the movie up here. And then he just said that it's actually kind of funny because Stephen King even says that this is the only film that he actually says that he hated the adaptation of, and he didn't really, according to this, and again this is on the Wikipedia article of The Shining, he wasn't a big fan that Kubrick had kind of omitted of Jack's alcoholism, and it's in there literally for that one bar scene, I think, and for a couple other things, and also, the disintegration of family and that kind of thing, because according to Stephen King, I mean he really he wanted to portray the family as a tight family unit, and then slowly kind of disintegrate. However, in the movie, you don't really even. They're not even a tight family, honestly. I mean, it's, Jack already, Jack already is kind of, starting to unwind. So, and so and I mean, and I just he's just not really just not a big fan of it. He also Stephen King says that he believes that he feels too much and thinks too little, which obviously Stanley Kubrick I believe is the opposite. Stanley Kubrick doesn't feel any. I would say Stanley Kubrick doesn't feel much at all, and he thinks a lot. It's actually really funny. I mean, I will admit. I mean, from what I'm reading, I don't know a whole lot about Stephen King, but from what I'm reading, the man that directed the adaptation of his film is probably a complete polar opposite from him. So that kind of adds a little bit that just kind of adds a little bit of a bit of a disconnect. Now, I will admit, now looking at this as well, and I actually saw this the other day when I was reading this, the new film adaptation of Dr. Sleep, which actually just came out last year, that actually was satisfied. He was actually really satisfied with the film adaptation of that. So much so that he said that basically that he said that, and I will quote him here: "Everything that I ever disliked about the Kubrick version of The Shining is redeemed here for me." End quote. So, and one of the things about Dr. Sleep is that they wanted to try and reconcile the differences in the novel and with the book. the novel and the Kubrick film, and it still all definitely takes place within the Kubrick, film universe, but it uses a lot more of the novel themes and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and so the film is over. That we went through all the end credits. So yeah, The Shining. This, I believe, was his Stanley Kubrick's second to last film, because after this film, it was 7 years before he released Full Metal Jacket, and then after that, it was 12 years before he released Eyes Wide Shut, and then Eyes Wide Shut became his final project, his final film that he ever made. The Shining wasn't that well received when it was first released in theaters. In fact, a lot of people would pan it. Actually, I mean, for an example, The Shining was nominated for a Razzie Award. Now, for those of you that don't know, a Razzie Award is quite literally the opposite of the Academy Awards. It's literally the Razzie Awards. It's like basically awarding everything for the worst in films. And Shelly Duvall was nominated for the worst actress, and then Stanley Kubrick was nominated for the worst director. So it was yeah. So yeah, it wasn't well received, but I mean, of course, I think looking back at it, it's been I think it's been, a lot, obviously it's much more well received, nowadays. I think, people would contend that this is one of the best made horror films, I think ever, honestly. And it's kind of going back with like Stanley Kubrick. He's very much a genre hopper. I mean, he's not shoehorned into one genre. I mean, most of the films that he's ever made have been basically war films, but he's made what I would say is probably the quintessential science fiction movie of all time in 2001: A Space Odyssey. He's made, I would say, this is the quintessential horror film of all time in The Shining. Some would argue that A Clockwork Orange is the definitive dystopian future film of all time. However, it also has other themes that go within as well. And then I would say Paths of Glory, Full Metal Jacket, are some of the best, war movies ever made too. So, especially Paths of Glory, Full Metal Jacket for me. I mean, it good parts, bad parts, kind of all around for that. But yeah, I mean, I think it just goes to show that, I mean, how amazing a director Stanley Kubrick is. So, because that he can make, I mean, quite literally, I think some of the best films just ever made, were made by Stanley Kubrick. So, shoot, do I have anything else? I don't believe I have anything else. It is currently 3 a.m, and I've been recording this podcast just nonstop for the last 5 hours. Because I basically did 2 movies back to back. I did Jaws and The Shining. And so yeah, thank you guys for listening. Again, it really means a lot that I have I got a lot of people listening. I mean, I check my YouTube views are, not the highest, but I mean, you still got people watching them, and, got a lot of people downloading it on Spotify and, Apple Podcasts and all that kind of stuff. So that's good to see, and I'm really happy to see that. So the schedule should be caught up, so I should be going back to releasing on weekends now. At the very latest, probably trying to release probably on Sundays, maybe Mondays if I could, but it just depends on, it just really depends on, kind of, because again, I got a very busy schedule, and it just depends on how I can what movies I can do and what I can fit in. But I will say again, as I stated earlier, for the rest of October, we will be doing a horror movie, and I will admit I am really hoping to get this month over with. I am not a horror movie fan. They quite literally scare the bejesus out of me, and that's quite literally why I don't like them. I mean, I kid you not, I think all the horror movies that I have seen in my life, Night of the Living Dead, The Shining, Halloween 2018, Halloween 2, and then I think that's it. I don't mess around with horror movies. I just don't. But I gotta step out of my comfort zone, I guess, for this month of October. Alright, thank you guys for listening so much. Be on the lookout for more episodes coming out. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and on Facebook. Make sure to stay golden out there, and I will see you on the flip side.